There she is.
Yes, the dress code is different.
These doctrines have been invented. And it was particularly interesting because he was coming to school that Sunday to do the Anglican confirmation. I knew I was going to meet him, you know. And I thought, there you have it. And of course, they live with a far greater than anybody else, really. Yeah.
That's all I did. I have my back to the window for that.
But what's interesting?
Yeah, it is. As soon as I see outside, I'm like,
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. It is my pleasure to introduce my dean, Father Mark Morosevich, the Dean of School of Theology and Religious Studies, and thank you for being here. And such an honor to have Msgr Irwin here. So thank you for doing this, Msgr.
Thank you, colleagues, for joining us here today. I think I know each of you personally, and that's always a wonderful thing, because the person that I get the pleasure of introducing, we have a long, long history together. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm the only person in this room that was Msgr Irwin's student before context and text was even written. That's how far back we go. It was I don't know whether it was a spring or a fall semester in the late 80s. And I was taking this seminar, and and I had already a previous round with Msgr in our Eucharistic theology class for us seminarians at the time. This was my previous incarnation here. And it was a great experience taking that, and so I look forward to join in this class and to look at some of these issues with the liturgical theology. The big buzz, of course, with Alexander Schneemann, whom Kevin refers to often in this book. And then in this seminar, we were looking at these different theologians, and he was just right in the midst of putting together his methodology. Little did I know that later I would have the opportunity to come back here as a professor and teach from his book. I find the methodology so fascinating because what he does is really pay attention to the dynamic work of the Spirit as the prayer of the body of Christ is happening. And how, if we pay close attention to the interplay between text and context, hence the title of the book, we understand so much. So as we have this second revision of this magisterial teaching, I now turn to my colleague and my friend to share with us more about his insights as he revised this context with a new text so that we may understand ourselves more completely and what we do in worship. Welcome, Msgr.
Good afternoon, and welcome back to me to this room. many, many times. I want to begin by acknowledging the presence of many guests here, including Andrew Wadsworth, who heads up ISIL, the translation committee for the English language liturgy. We just hired in the back from the FDLC. Father Jeffrey Abdallah is here doing his doctorate in Rome these days. We're back to do some research in this country, as well as friends and colleagues of Catholic U. As many of you know, I'm a New Yorker, which means you're in exile in Washington. And when I was growing up, the Cardinal Archbishop was Cardinal Spellman. And Spellman was a bit of an aficionado to write short stories with a certain kind of moralistic or spiritual twist to encourage people, but they weren't exactly all that profound. So one day, Cardinal Spellman, who was being visited by a priest friend from Boston, and walking down Fifth Avenue in New York. And the priest friend and the car Spellman were enjoying a lovely spring day, and Spellman turned to his priest friend and asked him, "Have you read my last book?" And the priest said, "I hope so." Thank you. This is the latest version of a book that probably will be my signature text ever. It is really my signature book about methodology. I've always been concerned, the subtext is how do you understand to teach liturgy? How do you do that? Because liturgy is such a different field. There's always something that, I'm going to quote Father Mark's mentor here, Father Robert Taft. He said, liturgy is like a top. You don't understand it unless you spin it. And you try to, almost when you write about liturgy, you're stopping something. But that's unfortunate, because liturgy is an event, it's an occurrence. I call it an act of theology. And that's why it's so important to revere it, and to respect it, and to understand it. It's like a top. Unless it's spinning, you really don't know what it is. Or the other Jesuit liturgist, Ed Martin, said, the dancer dancing is the dance. Describe a choreography, and you can do it many, many times, but every time you do it, the dance is somewhat different. And that's what part of this whole point about liturgy is. We may have the same texts, but we experience those same texts, meaning gestures, rituals, words, in different contexts. So, my own biography, and just to put it forward, born and raised in Mount Vernon, New York, a parish priest in the Archdiocese of New York, with the American College on the faculty there. Well, you know, seminary liturgy is unlike 1,000 elsewhere, as we know. It's its own unique style. Or I went to a monastery for 3 years, and frankly, that's the autobiographical reason why I spend so much time talking about the Psalms. Because the monastery made me love and live off of the Psalms in a way I'd never done before. Then I came to Catholic University, and the question of celebrating Mass at the shrine in St. Andrew the Apostle Parish in Silver Spring, St. Joseph on Capitol Hill, and helping out in parishes in Richmond, as well as Curly Hall sometimes. Those contexts are things that impact me, and they help me then rethink some categories. I'll give you an example. There's a great deal, and we have talked about the implications of liturgy in terms of our spiritual life and the question of social justice. Well, I said that for many years without being somewhat critical, but I said to myself, in the monastery, we're not picketing. We can't go outdoors and get people to lobby on voter rolls. So the implication of liturgy is not just social justice, living the justice of God with the confreres. And if you know anything about monastic life, that's why there's silence. Only when you talk about the other monks. The growth in charity becomes another way of looking at this whole thing in terms of the life relationship with liturgy. Always been a passion of mine to relate methodology and the question of living the Christian life. This particular revision, where did it come from? Well, Lit Press had asked me several years ago to do this revision, and I agreed to do it, but a certain few things got in my way. For example, being the dean. I often say the only thing better than being the dean is being the former dean. But that takes time and energy and effort, and not to mention about leukemia, which took me off the rails for about a year, finishing the book on sacraments, and then Pope Francis wrote Laudato Si, and they wanted a quick commentary about that, and then finally got back to context and text. And this, I don't think I can ever do this again. This is the book. So the curtain may come down on small monographs, but I can't do this again. I met two priest friends who were alums for dinner in New York about 2.5 years ago. And one is Father Andrew Small, who runs Pontifical Missions, and Father Dave Dwyer, who is a Polish priest. And having dinner, and I said, guys, this revision is going to kill me. And Andrew Small said, killed us to read it. It didn't exactly kill me, but I've spent it all on this book. And it is not here, it may not be any place else in print under my name, but the excitement and also the work was every single day for 3 years. I thought of nothing else academically but how this thing worked. And I rethought the whole book. And it's probably 75% a new book. And that's why it took so long, and that's why it really is. It's a revision in some ways, yes, but I rethought and reblended categories in new and different ways. And I've enjoyed that. And also, it took its soul. In fact, because the word context is so important to me, there's now a 60-page introduction suggesting new contexts in the church since 1994. And that means a John Paul papacy, a Benedict papacy. So that means all kinds of stuff has gone on. The question of second editions of rituals, new translations, all of that went on since 1994. Then the question of relating liturgy and theology has always been my passion. The law of prayer, the law of belief, and then I invent the term the law of action, how we live our lives, to put this in some kind of continuum. Major influence on this book, compared to the one before, is I've been very taken with the research and output of the Orthodox theologians about sacramentality. I've moved from symbol to sacramentality, and from sacramentality in Laudato Si, I think there's much, much more there than there was for me in 1994, in terms of my evolution of my thought. The question of Laudato Si is on my mind because I'm thinking of doing a book called Sacramental Theology after Laudato Si. Because once you look at creation in a different way, and once you call things brothers and sisters on our common home, then I don't think I can use the word it or use anymore. We raise up, but we don't use something in liturgy. And we revere those elements that comprise liturgy. That's a new thought process that I want to get into with that new book, Sacramentality is one of the big changes in the book. The chapter on time is brand new, and of course, by the way, I will acknowledge that it's a fairly hefty revision. It did get a little long, and the editor was fine, but it is a much longer book. The chapter on time was something really missing in the previous book. Because I really believe that liturgy is while we have graphs up with a circle and every other circle goes into a circle to circle. My argument is that liturgical time is not a circle, it's a cylinder. And you kind of pull it out. And every year is different. That's why the Paschal Candle has a new date this year. What's happening in the church, what's happening in the world. So it's also to be cyclical, but also linear. And that's a whole part of the chapter on time, in which there's been a lot of energy talking about collects and prayers, as Father Wadsworth knows very well, and where they came from. And the point that the Roman Missal is comprised of an enormous wealth of prayers from 4th century on. Chapter 7 is on the arts. Two confessions. I never liked the chapter on the arts in the previous book. I can say that. Never. It was incomplete. It wasn't well thought through. I was getting tired. And I said, so thank you for generous words about it, but I know that was the worst chapter. I think my approach to this one is a brand new way of looking at the arts without getting into, I like this, you like that, styles. I try to transcend all that in a new way of looking at it. And the question of the ministry of arts, in terms of the ministry. So that's a major contribution, I think, of this revision. And that was a very detailed set of research agenda items. Doxology is a question of how lex orandi influences lex tridendi, and vice versa, and what that means in terms of liturgy as a source of theology, as an event of theology, as I say. And again, that's hard to grasp. It's unlike reading Thomas Aquinas. It's a different kind of genre. It's an occurrence. It's highly symbolic, poetic, And there were some distinctions within the active liturgy in terms of what is more or less bedrock theologically. And finally, spirituality. That's always been a great interest of mine in terms of how we live our lives. And now I'm looking at, we live in a sacramental world, and that world is captured in the active liturgy, and then we go out to serve the world again. So there's a continuum here that I always want to maintain and uphold with regard to the active liturgy and to what liturgy really means in terms of orality and credendi. You may notice, if you look at the book, it has a one-page bibliography. Well, in fact, it's a 72-page bibliography, but the book was so big they couldn't publish it. So it's on, if you buy the book, it's online and you get the bibliography. But and that's its own testament, I think, to the proliferation of writing about liturgical theology in the last 30 years. So that attests to the field as well as to my own playing with the field and the question of authors. Now, none of us does these things individually, and for several years I've been able to work with James Starkey, who's a recent doctoral student and doctoral here at Catholic University. He's been enormously helpful to me with regard to the writing of the book, the editing of the book. James wrote the index, thank you, and has been really has stepped up to the plate as a fine research assistant, and has already begun to write in the field going beyond his mentor, which is what has to happen. Doctors are meant to kill their mentors psychologically, so he's beginning to do that. But I did ask James to say a few words about the book and maybe and his own experience of working with me on the book. So James, Director of Liturgy in the Diocese of Arlington, has a couple of words to say.
Well, Father Mark began by saying where he was when Msgr. Irwin was writing the original context and text. I'll do us all a favor and not say what I was doing. The original edition. But it's been quite an honor the past several years to help Msgr. Irwin in the writing and researching of this book, and was really taken on as a task to complement and to go beyond my own dissertation work, to do something in graduate school that was not just about writing my dissertation, but to grow both as an academic and as a member of the church. And so I just want to reflect on kind of three areas that I think the book contributes not only to our life as researchers, but our life in the ecclesial world. And so those three areas are the intense interdisciplinary and international quality of the research. So this book, just like the original version, is representative of many different countries, many different nationalities, as well as many different disciplines, from psychology to anthropology to sociology. And I think that's so important in our world today, first as researchers, to broaden our own perspective of what we perceive the world to be, viewing it not only through a theological lens, but through the lens of a psychologist or an anthropologist, to see the different sorts of actions and persons that are at play when we do celebrate the liturgy. And so just practically speaking, it pushed me to, as a doctoral student, I always wanted to focus just on the dissertation and just on my own specific topic. But it really broadened me to look at sources outside of my own dissertation, outside of my own interests, that really gave me a view of how the modern world, how science and how other disciplines can help elaborate theology, can help inform theology, as well as how theology can help understand who we are as people, so it can inform psychology and those other sorts of disciplines. Even from a practical standpoint, I'm in a very practical job now, a little bit beyond the intense research of academia, but still in that world. But the very practical standpoint of being able to relate to people on many different levels, on what do you encounter in your everyday life, what are you struggling with, What are the sort of relationships that you hold? What are the values that you lift up in your life? And to be able to use that as a tool to say, here's where theology enters in. Here's where the liturgy is important for you. Not just as the liturgy is important because we're told to do it, but because the liturgy is important as forming you as a member of the body of Christ and as forming you as a human person. The second area that I think needs to be emphasized is ecclesiology. You'll notice that the book doesn't have any chapter called the church or anything like that, because the whole book is imbued with ecclesiology. It's fundamentally about the church as a communal entity, as a community of persons. And so this ecclesial dimension really runs through everything that Monsignor does, whether it's text shaping context or context shaping text. It's really about who we are and how we live as the church. And so again, in academia, I think sometimes we need to be reminded that everything we do in academia is not only for the pursuit of our own interests or our own ideas, but is ultimately at the service of the church. And I think the ecclesial dimension of Monsignor's book just innately portrays that ecclesial dimension by, at every turn, I think he tells a story once, I'm not sure if it's in this book or one of the others, but a friend of his from seminary days asked him to say something in the language of liturgy, and his response is church. And context and text is really the embodiment of that principle. And of course, in practical reality, in my everyday life, it's about the church. As my own bishop says, Bishop Burbage, he says the most important thing about your job is the relationship with the people. You need to bring your credentials to that. You need to have a solid understanding of what you're saying, but you have to do it with charity. You have to do it in a way that builds up the body of Christ rather than in a way that simply puts yourself over other people. And so again, I think that is a great benefit of the book, not only in academia, but practically. And finally, as Monsignor said, a big contribution, a big change in the book is the intense renewal of sacramentality. Of course, sacramentality was always at play in the original context and text, but here it really permeates the whole of the book. There's no chapter that's not touched in some way by the principle of sacramentality. And so this is important again in academia because liturgical theology in particular has a need to move beyond kind of the 7 principal sacraments. We've studied those, and it's important to continue to understand those, but to look more deeply at what underlies the 7 principal sacraments, what they share in common with all of the liturgical activity of the church, but also what underpins them as the source and summit of the church. Namely that we're raising up creation, we're raising up our human lives in the liturgy, and that the liturgy calls us back out to care for creation, to care for others, especially the marginalized. And so sacramentality is a worldview that looks at creation as being raised up and revered in the celebration of liturgy is an important new direction, or at least new in the 21st century, a newly recovered direction that really is rooted strongly in the tradition of both the Catholic Church and especially the Orthodox Church as well. Practically, this comes to play in important realities in my life in the diocese. So I can't tell you how many times I've given presentations that are inspired not by what are the minimal requirements of baptism or Eucharist or whatever I might be presenting on, but how do we lift up creation in the celebration of baptism? How is water raised up and how does it transform who you are? And this is really impactful for the people who hear this. Right? They're moved beyond the idea of simply attending a sacrament to realizing not only are they transformed by the sacrament, but that their whole life is in fact transformed by it. And so again, this principle of sacramentality, I think, in the book has really come to play in a major way that touches upon liturgical arts and time, liturgy of the word, or the liturgical theology of the word. So this has played out in important ways in my life. And I'll just conclude by saying that all of these taken together, in my view, the book really presents what has become the common phrase liturgy as source and summit, it presents it less as a description than an imperative. That it's not that liturgy is the source and summit of our life, it's that we're called to live out that reality. That we're called to bring creation, to bring our lives to the liturgy, so that we can authentically say things like, I lift up my heart to the Lord. And it's an imperative that we take what we encounter in the liturgy, our encounter with Christ in the liturgy, and we take that and live that out in the world for the betterment of our brothers and sisters and for all of creation. So thank you.
That's why I teach chapel students, to be edified and to be taught by them as well. So thank you, James. I'll entertain some questions about the book for a few minutes. Yes.
I haven't read this version, this edition yet, but did you include pictures? And if you didn't, what was your decision not to include the pictures?
No, and a picture's worth 1,000 words, but sometimes some words are worth 1,000 pictures. I get it. But my thought was if I did that, I would be freezing the frame on taste or my individual choice, and that was not my intention. And deliberately, I did not do that in this book. I mean, we are going through an evolution, a light word, about arts and about church buildings and renovations, plural, and there's a good bit of ink and I think some kind of psychological blood being spilled over it. And my sense of it is, it's not a question of my decision, is what's the liturgy calling us to do, and what should the building be that enshrines this, and what are the arts that are involved in this. I'll give an example. A friend of mine who was in church in Richmond some years ago, and he had architects galore and consultants galore. Said to the architects, you all have to come to the Trinity, because you can't design the building without being at the Trinity. I think a lot of what's going on in terms of restoration or romanticism or going back in history is to idealize a certain time and frame when churches look this way. Well, stands true today. And in the process of that, I have found the most recent documents, two of them, from the Australian Bishops' Conference about the building of church and renovation to be extraordinarily rich. Compliments to our own of the Bishops' Conference in this country. Long way of saying, no, I did not, but the reason was I didn't want to put out there one particular, rather than say there were ways, plural, of going about this. And that's part of the complexity of the book. I mean, what does the liturgy say? Well, I say, what is the liturgy? I mean, there are many liturgies and facets to it that that's too simplistic. Yeah.
Very often the book is used assigned to seminarians to read, or I've even used it at the parish level to teach in different ways. For seminarians, people in the parish approaching the book, which is very substantial, how do you suggest using it in that way, or how is it meant to be used in that way, or approached by them to be beneficial?
Really at a loss of words, but it's a tough thought. And this is not Liturgy 101. This is not, sit in your rocking chair. This is a lot of work. And I also think that it's probably the kind of book that you can read on different levels, plural. But my best shot is to invite readers to immerse themselves in a free fall of the theology of what this is. I think it's rare that we say liturgy is an act of theology, but it is. I mean, and everything is theologically happens in the liturgy: church, Trinity, Christology, etc. I'll give an example now. This is a little bit more where the ties the road. One of the questions I asked in the book in the beginning is, what's the authority of the liturgy? And sometimes people they make choices about liturgy. Well, liturgy it's refreshingly, you open the book and you do the rituals and you tell you about the symbols, it's all in there. You needn't make it up. And I think sometimes, well, of course, I'm old enough to remember the Kennedys. Thank you. And inaugural speech was asked not what your country would do for you, and what you do to the country. Well, liturgy was said, ask not what the liturgy would do to you, ask what you do to the liturgy. Well, we got over that finally, but that was it was how do we change it, make it better or different? There was a parish up in New England, and they had a mass about creation, and someone brought in the globe, and they had prayers about the earth and all of that. Stop it! It's already in there. Why are you adding to it? So in that sense, religion is an authority, and to respect that and to learn that and immerse yourself in that, rather than saying, what can I do to it? I mean, it's I think that's one of the major temptations. And unfortunately, in examples, people do that all the time. You know, say one word, trying to get away from it quickly. Music. So there. That's in there, but I didn't, you know, that's another one. I mean, how we make choices about music, and then we decide what it is you're going to say. I think one of the major problems with the liturgical reform is that we spend so much time making it a didactic exercise. You understand it. Well, on the one hand, yes. On the other hand, we're meant to experience the pastoral mission of Christ, and that's got no bounds and that's got no words. I mean, it's to be engaged again and again by it. That's what this is about. So the authority of the liturgy is again not what we're going to add to it, but what is it already there, and what do you need to raise up, actually, is the phrase I use in James.
To piggyback on Chris's question, it strikes me that a very accessible text that you've written, Liturgy, Prayer, and Spirituality, is currently out of print. Is there any possibility you might be revisiting that text? Because I think that's an extraordinarily accessible book for parishioners, for seminarians, I think in terms of getting at the core of what I think Chris's question is asking.
Well, the gentleman to your left is asking me to look at that in my next David Pennington's here from Trinity, an alumnus of our program. I got an outline, and I asked the publisher to do that, but I guess I also feel that I'm on the back four of life, not 18 holes, so I've got to decide what I'm going to write between now and my demise. I did a book on professing the liturgy, which will be coming out this summer, and I'm working on this book on spirituality, and certainly an article, if not a book after, on sacramental theology, after my Dr. C. But I think that book filled a niche in terms of being invitational, and it'll be the new book will be suffused with sacramentality as a principle. But that's not my mind.
It'll stay there. I'm just thinking that one of the great losses for me of the liturgical renewal movement after Vatican II is that so much of what was written was pitched to a fairly elevated level, and the people of God were kind of left behind, mostly because their clergy were left behind. So to me, to get this kind of a text in front of people constitutes, from my perspective, particularly as a former pastor, a really beneficial resource. So just a plug to encourage you to keep it where.
Not so much a question, but a little appreciation that this occasion affords us, perhaps just continuing the thought that we've just heard expressed. There are two things for which I'm profoundly grateful in this book. The first is, I think, a characteristic of all that you write and your teaching and your speaking, and that is that everything is permeated by humanity. People use words like accessible. How is it that something becomes accessible? Well, I think it's the quality that enables many different sorts of people in different sorts of situations to open a book and feel that it personally speaks to them. And I certainly felt that when I read this book. And I'm profoundly grateful for that. And I think it's a quality of not very much theological writing, certainly in relation to the liturgy at the present time. The second thing for which I'm profoundly grateful for, as represented by this important revision of the text, is that as a faithful son of Sant'Anselmo, you have made our reflection on the liturgy rise from a consideration of the text, the classic commentary on the liturgical text. And I think it's a time when a lot of people struggle with that. You said very important things about the liturgical text, about the things we find difficult in living with how that is best presented, certainly in relation to aspects of translation. And I think that keeping the text middle and center in that reflection is something that we should be immensely grateful to you for.
Thank you. Part two, especially in the chapter on time, I refer back to texts again and again and again. That's kind of the, so therefore it leads us hearing this text in this way, and looking at what this text says, and raising up words and phrases and images that abound in the liturgy. One of my concerns is that the liturgy at Vatican II has been fairly highly didactic and not very primal. We are a sacramental folk, but the primalness has not been there, and which leads me then to the sacramentality aspect of what matters in liturgy. But at the end of the day, having said that, my reaction now in liturgy the hours and daily Eucharist, it's almost too wordy for me. I get so engaged in one phrase or another, I space out. Now I think that's okay theologically and liturgically because it's going to come back. But it's so wordy that it's almost overwhelming. And that's probably just as well. We have Lexia Divina and time to unpack it personally. But I think it's so rich that, and I spent most of my life doing it, that it's appropriately an important spiritual exercise.
I would like to continue acknowledgements after Monsignor Andrew, that I'm Father Jeff from the Maronite Church. I'm doing doctoral studies in Rome, looking at the principles of liturgical translation from Syriac into English. And I'd like to acknowledge and thank you, Monsignor, for including a mention of the Eastern churches in the book, because normally we're either considered as some sort of decoration, something exotic, or we're completely excluded. If we're lucky, we might be in the appendix or a footnote. So I just want to recognise and appreciate the inclusion of the Eastern churches, because in today's church, this is part of our ecclesiology, where we move away from us and them, or the church is the Roman Church, that together as one, we are the church, and this is the new context today. I'd like to ask also a question. How do you see your book fitting into the wider picture, following Pope Francis, of a more ecumenical look at the context of today's church?
Well, I deliberately referred to the fact that it's a decidedly Roman Catholic book, but the methodology is meant to help all liturgical churches, plural, in terms of understanding what's done liturgically. So I think the methodology is solid for those that subscribe to a ritual, a liturgy. Those who do not would have something different to say. To give an example, I mean, part of the context section of the book deals with a book by Brian Spitz called The Worship Mall. And all kinds of experiences that under the banner of liturgy, you know. And so one is called Cafe Worship. You get coffee and a guitar and a bagel and you have a talk and that's cafe worship, and I don't think so, but I mean, but the name is used, and so the question is, a place like that would not benefit from this book, but my Lutheran cousins and their cousins would benefit from this book, and Episcopalians and Anglicans and Presbyterians and Methodists would benefit from this kind of book. And the other part of it is, when you study it ecumenically, and not that this book is filled with it, but the amazing statements that are made theologically by the very fact that we use the same readings on different days. I was taught by Eastern Rite students in my class several years ago that we in the West use John 1 as the proclamation for Christmas, and that's the proclamation for Easter. So hello. Multivalence at work, which is used in every other page. I mean, it's so multivalent you can't nail it down, and yet that's why it's so broadening, and what I'm saying now is exhausting, because you see so many possibilities out of the context and text of different churches. So I think the methodology would be solid, and that was intended, but the examples are decidedly Roman Catholic.
How do you treat the extraordinary form in your book?
Briefly and with delicacy. Because in the introduction, I basically argue that Pope Benedict gave permission for certain folks at certain times, and that's dealt with, I think, pretty carefully, but the rest of the book is predicated on the revised Roman Rite after Vatican II. That's the theological basis I use.
An issue today, of course, a perennial issue, homilies. And we talked a little bit about word, and I think that, of course, as a student of the context and text, and it always reverberates in my mind when I prepare to preach. Any new insights that you gained while revising this in light of your own preaching, and any interest in bringing that forward in, as people were talking about, other accessible ways for those who are involved in the craft to invite them deeper into?
Well, first of all, with regard to the methodology, in this book, I went beyond classical liturgical books to say that things like homileries and martyrologies need to be part of the stuff of unpacking the liturgy, because that was also part of what was going on in people's lives. So homilies are there. The other thing is, toward the end of the book, I say that liturgy is always a new event. And part of the new event is the homily. And I think that always occurs in relation to world, church, all kinds of things. I do not say how homily ought to be, because I don't know. The Pope seems to think he knows. But if I'm in a suburban parish in Richmond, I can start with 11 minutes, but if I'm in an African American parish, at 11 minutes, they're just kind of gearing up. So I got to be respectful of the cultures there, and Hispanic cultures, and Italian cultures. So as far as length, no, but then I'm concerned that homilies be much more mystagogical by their very nature, that they are intrinsic to the. Why are we preaching this in this event? Why are we going to go to the altar table? Why are we going to go to the baptismal font now? Why go, anoint the sick now? Why the absolution? That's the crucial part of liturgical homily. And then I will also interpret the scriptures by way of their placement in the lectionary. And so I'll use the example of the sermons of Isaiah and say that they're used in Advent in a certain way with John the Baptist. They're used in the pastoral liturgy these days by way of Jesus himself, referencing the servant of God. So those contexts help us understand the scripture, and it's a liturgical hermeneutic which builds on historical criticism, but it's not a free fall that says what you want to say. And so engaging those scripture readings in more liturgical events, and the homily is meant, I think, to be a helpful commentary, and then draw us from this to the altar. I can't resist a reference to a musical mistake that will be made next week, probably in many places. my opinion, in my opinion. The interest antiphon for Holy Thursday night is let us glory in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. Jason McFarland did his doctoral dissertation on that antiphon and different texts and settings and all that. But there's another hymn that's often used on Holy Thursday night, All is Prepared. And that gets you ready for Holy Thursday, but I'm sorry, my dear friends, that doesn't cut it. The antiphon is for the whole Triduum. So Lift High the Cross is the best entrance that day because that's what the liturgy is saying to us. And it's not parceling out. We're going to go to the table tonight and the cross tomorrow and the conference. Hello? But, and even the subtlety of that choice makes a statement didactically about what the liturgy is, which goes beyond it. Doesn't that make sense? So don't really have to go to church with me, of course. And then I will say this, having done all of this, and again, I probably think you again, but there comes a point when you are not a theater critic. Whatever goes on is what's happening, and you're attentive to that. And that's what matters. So while you might do it differently, I'll sing that song on Holy Thursday, and it just goes on. So otherwise you can't do it. In the best sense, you surrender to the ecclesiology and the liturgy that's there. And in some ways you can direct it, support it, but when it's happening, it just happens. And you don't have to make it up. Well, thank you all for coming on the search day and for good conversation and for your compliments and questions. And if you want to buy the book, I'll give you half price. Which is my cost is $25. You can buy the book. Thank you for coming. And we'll chat for a bit. Thank you.
So come and buy a book. Thank you for coming.
And then like switch off and on traffic lights. it's something that I feel like I should have started to do. So, and I appreciate how everyone is so passionate about it. You can tell that a lot of times, my friends,
Let me know. Let me get through.
I'm fine.
One of these shorter of the back.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very important. I agree.
Stated in a way that,
And you we're in the same diocese.
That's right. Is there any other, well, there is Newcastle, and what's the name of it? What's the name of the diocese? That's Hexham and Newcastle, which just got to be
Spirituality was. Okay.